Welcome, everybody. I think we can start. So the reason why I ask you this question is I just want to feel the vibe in the room against the AI. So some time ago, it was really a good idea to talk about the AI at the conferences. And nowadays, like a week ago, I even got those attendees asking me this question if I would be spending a lot of time on AI during my session. And the answer is it will be mostly about the architecture or working with documentation. So the AI will be only one of the tools that we will cover on the way, but the talk is not specifically about the AI. So, but nice to see your answers. And I can see we have some pros here in the room. That's good. So this is Automate Your Software Design. I'm Marcin Samsonowski. Yeah. If you care about who's talking to you, that's about myself. I do architecture in different flavors, mostly currently enterprise and solution architecture, but I also do a bunch of stuff around teaching. And my main magnets, well, also at this point, it's important to mention that before getting into architecture, I used to be a developer, and that's pretty important here because I believe I have experience with those things. Well, most of the things that I will be covering, production experience. So to me, that's important. Now, my main magnets are things around the architecture and the SDLC cycle itself. And the session, that's built from two pieces. The first part is about building blocks. I need to lay the foundation so we are all on the same page. And we cover some diversity of topics. And then from that, we can build a process. So also the intensity will go up with the second part. There are different kinds of sessions, and if you look for a meaty presentation about a narrow field, that's not this one. That's more as an overview, a big picture around the architecture and working with documentation. So when thinking about designing, there are two groups of issues I can see. One of them is what you can see on the picture here. That's chaos of information. So the documentation that is not really useful, or nobody knows how to touch on things, so not to break it anything, all right? And the other group of issues is over-engineering. So I'm not sure. Well, I believe everybody in this room were in the situation like I was a couple of years ago. I joined a project, a greenfield. We built everything from scratch, right? And everybody got excited, because who wouldn't? Maybe some people got too excited, like architects especially, and they created all those layers of abstraction, right? Or all those policies that we needed to comply to, and the documentation that we needed to deliver. So before bringing any value to the table, the production value, we needed to spend so much time on documentation and all those policies, right? Also, that's not the place where we want to be. So those two groups of issues, I believe there is a solution for that, and in my opinion, that's automation that comes in various levels of maturity, and we'll try going through them, because sometimes it might be enough to just keep things in the code. That's like a preparation for automation, but sometimes you want to go further, right, and use some other tools to actually automate stuff. So let's go through them. Now, we start with SD, because like in all of those phases, actually, there is some kind of automation that you could incorporate. And I'm pretty sure you can find a variety of resources also here at this conference, but also in the internet, about automating development and testing and so on. We won't be talking too much about this. We'll focus on design, but why not taking some inspirations from those, the other ones? And we start with working with documents, all right? Planning and requirements analysis. And so in those phases, we mostly work with documents. And most people end up in the tools designed for that, like Azure DevOps or Confluence Wiki, Jira, like depending on the religion and also the company you work for, right? So those tools, they address some issues with working with documents. Like, for example, they try to help with versioning, but it's not. We all know that it's not so mature, and it's hard to keep track of and compare those versions, control them. So, just one thing to mention here. We can also affect how the contents of the documents are being stored there. in those systems. Like this is a default one, that's Confluence syntax, and you could change it to something else. And that something else could be, for example, a syntax that is well known, like Markdown. Who knows this one? Okay, like half of the room, maybe more. That's good. So just quickly how it looks like. On the left-hand side, you can see some Markdown, and it's generated to HTML, right? That's a basic example. Now, I'm not saying this is designed for working with requirements analysis. I'm just saying you can use it starting from those phases and also later on. So it's basically a good tool to doing all those things that we'll be discussing later, also in the design phase, like generic for working with documents. Now, let's just skip for design phase for a minute and go to development. And as I mentioned, there is a variety of resources about this one in the internet everywhere. So we'll just touch on one thing. How many know about the tools like Docusaurus and all the colleagues? I can see like 2 hands up, that's fine. So I just give you an example how it looks like. On the left-hand side, you can see Markdown, and then it gets translated into HTML, and that HTML, that becomes the documentation of ours that we can keep in the static in product repository. So in the same place as we work with the product code. And then in that folder, we keep Markdown files with the documentation. So we believe they are auto-updated, right? Because it's easier to track them if they are in the code. Now, when I say it renders Markdown, I also mean that it supports Markdown, which is everything that is about to come in this presentation, like spoiler alert, for example, diagrams in the code, right? So it's also possible to keep it here. And yeah, static pages are generated, and we get the logical structure of this documentation. Now, we have a control and validation of those, and a simple case is if you have multiple files, and you always have multiple files of this documentation, one is moved somewhere else, then the links are being updated automatically, right? That's a simple case, but you can also do some more complex stuff, like for example, imagine having, well, that's maybe not a perfect example, but if you want to track the documentation changes, so for example, each module in the code, it has to have one file related with the documentation, and we want a rule, so the documentation gets updated every time the code in the module has been changed. All right, so we can also put a trigger like that in on pull request, for example. You get my point. So what's wrong with that actually? Can you see any problems with the situation? So in this situation, every time we change something in the documentation file, we need to go through a pull request, right? And that's not something that we always want. So it depends on the situation. If we feel that the pace of development is most important, then we probably won't have rules like that. But maybe if we work with a majority of junior developers, it still happens in the age of AI, then you want to have that rule, so you get more control over what happens and what gets into the repo. So that's also possible with tools like that. Now, why I'm describing this? Because maybe not the Docusaurus and other tools like these we'll be using later in the design phase, but the mechanism is the same. At the end, when we'll be building the process, I will get back to this, that we might get more control over the documentation that we want always to be up to date. And by the way, people agree with me on that, but to me, one single factor that is most important about the documentation is it always has to be up to date. Because not up to date, then it's actually not a documentation at all. You know? Yeah, that's my take. Now, can we get to design phase, or you have any questions at this point? Can't see any? All right. So when I say design, what do you think about? What's that actually? We have some, yeah? Architecture, yeah, I like it. Yeah, so we get some basic requirements, right? And we are before development, so yeah, some architecture, maybe some decisions, maybe like, yeah. Now, it also depends on the role you have. If anybody is not listed, then sorry for that, I didn't mean to exclude you. So those roles, they will expect different results from the design phase. And this is actually a translation from the requirements to a blueprint, which is kind of set of implementation details, right? And it also has a formal representation, which is called the SRS document, Software Requirements Specification. And it consists of a variety of things, which would be expectations and some requirements, plus some UI UX designs, then architecture, infrastructure, data, and so on. Now, the first part, let's just say what we already discussed. That's pretty good starting point for working with documents, and I don't feel any need discussing that more for simple cases with the documents. The UI UX, that's a different story. Of course, there are tools that help you with automating UI UX designs, like Figma, for example, but that would be a different presentation, maybe a separate one I should create. So we'll skip this one. We will mostly will talk about the architecture and actually the infrastructure, data, and so on. That's also part of the architecture, right? So let's stick to this one. And did I say architecture is the same thing as design? I did not, but you can look at it as a well, means to help you figure out what you want to achieve, the architecture, right? And also the design helps you determine how you will do that, and that's also a way to get to that architectural products. That's the design, right? So when I say design, that's maybe diagrams, maybe something more. What else? You mentioned architecture before, that's cool. So not only diagrams. To get answer to that question, what is actually architecture? Apart from being a buzzword, right? So in my definition, the architecture is everything that helps you with thinking about something, something bigger, a whole part, and communicating about it. And that might be different things, because like for myself, enterprise architecture, that's whole company, right? Processes and structures and technology and business. There might be also a solution architecture, domain architecture. That's levels of abstraction. There are also layers, like we have infrastructure architects, security architects, data architects. That's layers, right, of architecture. And at this point, it will be easier talking some examples. So let's find out like what will happen with our original conference registration application. The planning, first phase, we know that we want mobile and web application for registering to the conference, and also some starting requirements. You can also add some other ones on top of that. And at this point, when we have that, next thing we should do is making some decisions, right? And those decisions could affect different things, like, for example, choosing a payment provider. So we pick one, no matter which one, like some external one, and we forget about that, like couple years later. I mean, we forget about the context, why we made that decision. Is that a problem? What do you think? Does it matter? Why? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we miss the context, we miss the reasons, right? So I like to say that first step to change is awareness. You need to know the situation, the context, why the decision has been made, so you can make a better decision or just understand the decision that has been made in the past, right? So it might be a good idea to store them, the decisions. And important questions are how and where we will do that, but also who will be working on those, and if they will be changed and how often and so on, what is the impact of those? Why not keeping them in the repository as a code? All right, we get persistence and history, and we control permissions, who is able to affect them. Now, this is a special citizen on our list in our toolbox, that's ADR, and that's actually not a tool. That's not even a structured format, because it doesn't tell you what sections you always need to have. There are only some recommendations, like you should have a context documented, or maybe a timestamp, But depending on the type of decision you make, you might also want to have different things in those files, like maybe some diagrams or maybe compliance to security policies and so on, all right? So ADR, they are used for documenting decisions, and they are stored in ADL, the architecture decision log, or the architecture decision logs. There might be multiple, all right? Because, like, for example, I mentioned there might be different stakeholders, maybe on the system level, maybe a domain, maybe whole company. There will be also different decisions. For example, like we go microservices, or maybe we just want that library in the system, all right? So there might be different levels of those logs and different stakeholders to that. And what's important, they are snapshots, so we don't change them in the future. They just stay there to give us context for the next decisions being made. So we have history of choices. And it allows levels, what I just described, with different stakeholders. Yeah, so next important question is what we should document. And I would say that's important, well, yeah, important factors, something that affects the architecture significantly. And what is that actually? I just give you some examples. So in general, documenting which library you choose, that's not a thing that you want to document, right? Because it doesn't affect so much the architecture. But imagine you have a library that you know it has some vulnerabilities, some security issues, and you still pick that because for some other reasons, like it doesn't affect you. Maybe it's better talking about performance and so on. That might be a case when you want to document that, all right? Obvious always. Now, the history decisions and the context, and those serve as a guide for the future decisions also, and improve the communication. Now, on the left-hand side, you can see some markdown for ADR, and there is a generated content for this. By the way, all those examples I show you, they are in Visual Studio Code add-on, so you can keep them in the same IDE of your choice. Working with documentation. So we have those ADRs, right? And what else? Probably diagrams are an important thing in the design phase, right? So most important thing, I would say, even from the whole presentation here, if you would be to choose only one to take out from here, is diagrams are as maps, you know? Like if you go to Google Maps, you just, you know, zoom in, zoom out, you always know what kind of information you want. And you turn on layers, like bike paths and topography and so on. That's the same as layers on the Google Maps, right? So you always need to know what kind of information you know and why. Who you will be talking with about that, all right? Because there are so many kinds of diagrams, and if you would be to document all of like everything on each layer and level, then you would end up in the situation I described in the beginning. Spending so much time and updating those that you wouldn't have any time to actually bring production value. Now, I like describing those diagrams with the levels of maturity, let's call it, and that would consist of different dimensions. One of them is a syntax, the notation. Then there is also a medium where you store it, or the tool you use, and also the process around it. And let's start small with some basic drawings. So if you draw something on the napkin, maybe some simple brainstorming, that's sometimes enough. If you just need to take those things from your head, put them on the paper, and then throw it away, right? That's enough at this point. That's how it looks like, simple case. Now, usually that's not the case, right? We at least want to maintain them. And for that, we turn to what you see is what you get tools that allow you to save the file and edit it again, right? And again, the example. Now, if I told you that there was no notation at this point, I would lie, because there's always a notation. The thing is, it was pretty simple one, the boxes and arrows, right? So you didn't know what are the, I mean, you knew what are the boxes, but nobody else knew that, right? It could be the process, the component, anything else. So if you want to communicate with people and work with them on those diagrams, it might be a good idea to use some well-known notation. And the best known notations are, well, basically BPMN for the processes and UML basically for everything else. Simplifying, of course, because for example, enterprise architects, we use notation called Archimate that allows you to see the big picture in one place on one diagram. So for example, starting with the motivation and the processes and roles and going to the artifacts, the pieces of code, all right? So you can have all it in one place, on one picture. So, but that's specific. Let's just keep it at this point to more well, development needs, let's say, and UML and BPMN, mostly UML. Again, simple example. Right, and it's pretty powerful. I'm pretty sure it's the same in the other IDEs. So you can basically just draw all of them in the same IDE that you use for product code. Now, at this point, sometimes it's enough, all right, but just hear me out. So maybe put it this way. How many of you have been in the situation that the requirements have changed significantly? Like, I mean, I guess all of us, right? So sometimes it's hard to keep track over of the things. If you use those diagrams that I mentioned before, it's really a mess if it grows, you know, and it's hard to find those things. Then there is no thing as history at this point, who did what and what are the changes and so on. And if they are supposed to stay, maybe that's a good idea to do better. And what would that be? You can see where I'm heading to, right? Let's just keep them in the repository as code. And doing that, we'll get a control and validation, so it's easier to keep them up to date. I'm not saying it happens automatically, but it's easier to track that. Then we get versioning, and we also get auto generation. This one I would like to spend a minute on. So just to give you some ideas. So imagine you have that repository, and there are some configuration files with maybe server IPs or server names, maybe with some communication, and then you just like once write a script that goes through that documentation with those files, and then generates the map of the servers automatically, all right? I did that, and that works. That's really nice. Also, like I am aware of tools like SonarQube, for example, but let's just imagine you want to have some custom metrics that is hard to get from anywhere else. You can also implement it the same way as I just described, a script, gathering the information, the metrics that you want, and then also on a daily basis you can have those diagrams being updated. All right, so that's pretty nice tool that only the imagination limits you here. And of course, diagrams, the same as with tests, that's the best documentation that you can have for a new person, especially to join the team. Now, just notice how many things around the process we got when having those in the code. And again, I'm not saying it's always the case that you want to have them in the code, because sometimes the effect that you get is not so significant, but the effort that you need to put in is not worth it, all right? But if you want, if you have some specific parts of the architecture that you want to document, and like one of the cases is people keep asking you the same questions. They come to you and ask about some piece of architecture. That's for sure the case that you want to document that, right? And put those diagrams in the code, in the repository. Now, how to do that? There are a couple of common tools, and I will mostly mention Mermaid, although PlantUML is really similar. I mean, it has a different build-up, and also, well, serves a bit different purposes. Maybe Mermaid is a bit more modern, but in general, those tools are similar. So I'll just show you some example with Mermaid, but it's the same goes for PlantUML. Now, yeah, just some simple sequence diagrams. So just notice the syntax on the left-hand side. How easy is that? All right, just some arrows. Of course, it has a documentation attached, and each one means something else. Also, the state machine. So if you ask me what happens if you misspell one, of course there's no validation on it, so it just shows a different node on the diagram, but you will see that from the diagram, right? So yeah. Then there is also entity relationships diagram and some flowchart. Now, when we use them, it's not only in the design phase, we also use them on daily basis. Like, for example, imagine I did that working with a team of developers and on dailies talking with those diagrams and not the Kanban boards, all right? So you have those boxes, the components, for example, they are automatically maybe colored, which one is completed, which one is in progress, and so on, and who's on what. I mean, picture worth thousands of words, right? So it really works. Now, we always do that from top to bottom. So what I mentioned with the maps, right? You're looking for some specific information, and you need to know which kind of diagrams you want to have and maintain them. You consider granularity and layers, what I mentioned, also the stakeholders who will be talking with you about that, and the most important effort to effect factor, right? So again, how much work you need to put in to maintain those and what you get from that. So is it just a napkin, or maybe you want to keep them in the repository, right? Full support. Is it a good idea to have a Cartesian product, everything documented in diagrams? Probably not. Again, because too much time on maintenance, right? Now, there's actually, okay, so what I was telling you now, that leads us to maybe a customization of the scope that we will want to document in those diagrams. And one of the custom approaches here would be C4, the notation with Structurizer, which is a tool for that. Both created by Simon Brown, and then you get, that's one of the approaches, right, to tailored scope. How many heard of C4? All right, just a couple. I would just give you some simple example from official website so you can get the thinking here. So it basically considers the granularity. So you get from top to bottom. You have a can you see that from the end of the room? Okay, so you get the first level, which is a context of the system. Like we have that one piece. This is our internet banking system, and it operates in a context, all right? It has some relations. Now, we want to dig in more into that. So I'm not sure if you can see the box here around the system now, but that's what is inside the internal banking system. It also keeps to the relations from the outside. And now we are on the level 2, which is actually containers. And the container is something that is deployed independently, like the API, for example, or database. And now we pick one of the containers, the API actually, and we dig in more. So that's level 2, the components. And that's everything which is inside of a container, the components. And the level 4, which is a code level, which is actually not recommended to use, you know, because it's too fragile. And also IDEs help you with generating that. So that's rarely the case that you need that. Now, how it's done? On the left-hand side, you have the model, all right? And on the right-hand side, you have the views defined. So you keep the data in the same place, and then you just define how they are visualized. So each red box now is a different level of diagramming. Okay, so did we find it? Is it like one and only for our needs? What do you think? That's actually funny because I was showing that last time on another conference, and there was, well, apparently Simon Brown, the creator of that, on this talk, and he was like, later we had a discussion. But in my opinion, that's not a solution for everything, because I mean it is specific in a couple ways. Like, for example, it addresses the issues that you have with Mermaid and PlantUML. So in those tools, you cannot affect how it's visualized. You cannot drag and drop the elements. Here in C4, there are two files, one for the content and the other one for the visualization, what is like positioning, how it's positioned, right? So it helps with that, but still what I mentioned a couple of slides back, so it only addresses one of one of the dimensions, the granularity. How about the layers I mentioned, like data, infrastructure, security, and so on? It doesn't. I mean, I know that there is another version that I think aims to address that, but the last time I checked, it wasn't so mature, So it's not a tool for every needs. Nice thing about it is there are a variety of options migrating from one to another, from C4 to Mermaid and PlantUML, both ways. So it's nice if you want to mix between them. And yeah, we are at this point. I also have some bonus tracks for you, and I'm not saying you should do that, but you could, all right? So for example, Git charts. So really nice way simulating Git without Git actually. That's helpful if you want to figure out why Git went this way and not another one. Now you could also generate some Gantt charts from the code, and I was surprised when I figured out it's really hard to find a tool that you could use to do that, like a private tool, not in the company with some licenses bought. Expensive licenses. Also some mind maps and some other charts. You could even write a presentation in the code, all right? First version of this presentation was created like this. It's not like that anymore. Okay, so at this point, did I forget about anything? So I mentioned there will be some AI, right? Let's check on that. I asked at the source, I asked a couple of those tools if they can be helpful with improving software design. Now, first thing what I did, that's my mistake, of course, I didn't specify, I mean the designing process and not the products of design. So that was one thing. When I specified more, I started getting some hints that I moved on next with some more details and got the names of the tools I described, all right? So that's actually the case. You also have it verified now by the AI tool, all right? And I also asked another tool that you can see here, what is the difference between the tools? And that's the first place where you can see it's easy for those LLMs to trick you. Because that's a good thing that we are on this presentation, right? Because we already know that there are some differences between those tools. But seriously, Mermaid and PlantUML, one is built in Java, the other one is built in JavaScript. One requires server-side, another one doesn't, all right? So you won't get any information like this from LLM unless you know what to ask about, all right? So my point is, okay, also, next slide. So I also asked about some diagram codes, and I got some. I put them in Visual Studio Code again, got that generated on the right-hand side. It works. But then I didn't like a part of it, so I specified a bit and got a new version of the code, which is obviously not validated in the tool, in the LLM itself. All right, so it doesn't know the code that I got from him doesn't work. So yeah, you can see the error on the right-hand side. Now, is AI changing the game? So it's not a rocket science. You know that already because you use AR, right? So it does change the game if you know what you're doing, if you know your domain. Yeah. And of course, it's easier to learn new things and automate some stuff. But one of my rules is automate only what you are able to do manually yourself. So I try never to delegate the tasks to LLM or in general AI that I'm not able to do on my own, because then I'm not even able to validate that. Yeah. So our sympathetic fellow. Well, some things you could do to improve that. Maybe work on your prompts, your workshop. So one of those methods of building prompts is this one, Racket, all right? So if you tailor your prompt better, you also will get better results. So as I said, that's just one of the methods. But if you specify, I'll give you an example. So talking to AI, right? You are a solution architect with some experience with microservices. I want to have a technical documentation generated for this application, for conference registrations. We do have in the company already those and that tools, and we want to also incorporate that. We have teams knowing those technologies, and maybe costs are important, giving some examples of the documentation that we want as an output. And then if we provide prompt like this, probably we'll get way more accurate results, all right? Now, yeah, sure, let's put AI tools on the list, why not? Let's just use them, but with your head. And okay, so that was mostly the building blocks. And let's move to the process, all right? I'll just give you one more story with Claire. She's a real person, and she used to be PM, maybe she's still PM. So when AI became a thing, she discovered that she kept asking the same questions all over again. All right, just the projects were different, the domain was different, but the prompts were the same. So what she came up with was a product built on the LLM, ChatPRD. All right, that's tailored for generating technical documentation. And I again asked at the source if it can be useful. Although it doesn't have, yeah, I don't expect you to read everything. I just describe what is important. So I asked about the technical documentation, if it can help with it. And although it doesn't have the SRS template, it's still the one I mentioned earlier. It's still able to help with the generic technical documentation. So first I specify just like 1 or 2 sentences about our application, and then it asks questions, all right? And that's pretty important factor that you usually miss when you talk about what's the value of AI, all right? Because that's mostly automation, but it's not only, because sometimes it's also making us think about the aspects of what we want that we wouldn't normally think about. Like, for example, what is known value for the customers and what is actually a value, all right? This distinguishment between those. Also, okay, so I got some, well, some more questions. Who will be the customer of that application? Is that going to be only online or also on site, and so on and so on. When I specified that, I got some documentation. I just skip a couple of those. So I got some documentation that I could put as markdown to our repository. Why not? Let's do that. I went through it. It's actually not so bad, you know. It's like good starting point. And of course, the loop starts here because you can take couple more generations talking with the tool and specifying more. Maybe you will also have a more accurate output. So when we are done with that, why not using this output as an input somewhere else, like here in Perplexity, for example? All right, so what we can do with that? We now have some technical documentation. Going back to SDLC, that's after first phases, so planning and requirements analysis. Now it's design, and can it be useful? Okay, so again, so asking about some ADRs, maybe those could be generated from the documentation that we have, plus some instructions for the decision. So we want the first ADR that's generated, and also the other ADR, maybe for RESTful API now. So we got both, export them as Markdown to repository, and maybe we want some template for the ADR, because why not? Having that, we can also export it to repo and use it everywhere in the company. Like, for example, a standard for security decision, for example. So no matter which LLM you use, in what version and in which team, you will have the common template in the company, all right? Why not? Now, cleaning a bit, a template, putting in repo, and that's fine. The next thing is asking about some diagrams. And those tools, they are not perfect with drawing diagrams, but they can write code, right? And that's a good thing that we have been here at this presentation, and we already know Mermaid. So let's use that. And what kind of diagrams you can create? bunch of them. Yeah, let's start somewhere. So I got that code, the sequence diagram in the box, and moved it to Visual Studio Code again. That's generated, pretty nice. But I didn't like the fact that it's only a success path, for payment. I wanted to add failure path. Asked about that, got the code, put into Visual Studio Code again, and now it's pretty complex for just those two cases. And that's where the creativity kicks in, actually. So I just give you one example, but I'm not saying that's something that you should do, all right? So for this problem, the solution would be maybe to mark them, those two paths, the success and failure path, all right? And have separate diagrams for those. So I asked the LLM to do that, and actually it took him like 7 minutes. You know what? I was like disappointed a lot, but I got both diagrams after that generated from the code that I gave it. And then there was my thought. Maybe I should treat what I inputted as a model and those generated things as a visualization that I will always get dynamically. So keep less things in the repo and then just generate what you want, all right? Maybe now you want to have only a diagram for infrastructure or for data, for example. So limiting the amount of data you put into repository. Now, what else? We could also wrap prompts, as Claire did with ChatPRD. Maybe we have some specific needs. We could also teach the LLM our domain knowledge. And actually, that's what's happening right now on the market. So companies, they build racks or they build AI tools inside of their infrastructure. And they can teach them things like the values of the company, what infrastructure we have, if we are in the cloud or we are on Kubernetes and so on, what is our knowledge base, what projects are actually at this point failed and which succeeded and so on. And having all of that understood by the AI tools, it helps getting more accurate results, all right? So what else? Of course, there are some more complex tools like MCP, the protocols, but also also other ones like the environments for working with agents, for example. Now, I described a couple of pieces in the process, only a couple of those, because for the other ones, the mechanisms are the same. So let's just look at the list. We have those decisions and the diagrams being generated. But they might be generated from the documentation, but also live from the transcription of meetings. And then you just have to, approve the decision, for example, that has been made on the meeting. Then we might have also different things like cost estimates, or I mentioned the ChatPRD, right, built for specific needs. The same mechanism goes for other things like cost estimates or threat analysis. There are specific tools that are created specifically for that. And you could also put them in CI/CD loop to go through those steps in the process. There are also fitness functions that you could run in CI/CD using those tools, even fed with the knowledge of your documentation. Like, for example, we have those assumptions that we want to separate the layers, and then and a bunch of other stuff. And then you put those tools, analyzing this, maybe use some ArcUnit and other tools like that to validate if those rules have been met in the CI/CD. So also detecting the architectural drift, the difference between the reality and the documentation, all right, detecting that. So also the same way, from the documentation and analyzing the source code, the infrastructure, and so on. So you could actually put some gates in your CI/CD loop using those tools and those mechanisms. Now, next thing is AI support levels. So first, we can start with some basic prompts. We did that in the presentation, right? There are also examples of assistance, like ChatPRD. It keeps asking you a question. questions. And when you specify, it's able to provide more tailored outcome from that. But you could also use tools like Nathan or Makecom or so, and build workflows from those. You could also use AI agents, giving only the goal. I want to have a technical documentation generated for this documentation, and you already know my domain in the company, as I described before. You know the values, you know the infra, and so on, and that's easier to get full process automated, all right? Using the AI or the AI agents communicating to each other. Like, for example, I mentioned the ADRs, right? Different ADRs on different levels. Let's just imagine we have different agents now. So one is working for the documentation for the project, and then when it's approved, it also triggers another agent that is updating the decisions on the company level. So it's also possible to have that farm of agents talking with each other. Now, key takeaways from the presentation. So there's no size fitting all needs, right? You always need to choose what you need it for. And most important, effort to effect factor to avoid troubles that I described in the beginning. So sure, use tools, also AI. And yeah, if you want to give me some feedback or you want to continue on any of those topics, because there were many, we can do that now or also later. I will be around. And using a moment, if you don't mind, I will just take one with you. All right. Now, I think we can have a couple minutes on the questions, if you have any. Yeah?
So my question would be, you mentioned that don't use AI for tasks that you can't do it manually.
Yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, because you cannot validate it. I mean, since AI also gathering all the information from the internet, can't you also validate it with AI? I mean, there is hallucinations, of course, but wouldn't be an easier and also better validation when it can also compare it to what's on the internet and could validate for you whether it's a good implementation or not, or whether it's a good outcome.
Oh, okay. So this way. So if I understand your question correctly, so let's just delegate validation from myself to what is in the internet. Yeah, that's okay. That's a bit more complex, you know. So starting from there are different kinds of companies, and not all of them want to put their data into internet. You know, not even validate true what is in the internet. So it's not always possible. But even if it is, it depends. You know, favorite answer of architect, right? So.
It's a broader knowledge that it has. I think sometimes the validation of it could be even more accurate than us.
Well, I mean, sometimes it can be, but it depends on the impact of decision that you're making. So, for example, working for banks, I wouldn't trust it so much to make decisions for me if they were, you know, affecting important factors. So, of course, sometimes you can do that. Like if you are learning new stuff, or you're, you know, you just want to know how it's done by the other people, then that's fine. But if you look for the answer for your question specific to your company or your situation, I wouldn't trust it so much in all of the situations. So, but you are right in some part that there are situations that might be better to use the internet. And I mean the LLMs that will ask the internet, right? So yeah. Any other questions? Can't see any. So I think that's it. Thank you.